Welcome to Celebrity Central, where we pull back the velvet curtain on the feuds that powered 5 of cinema's most unforgettable love stories. Tonight, we're counting down the top 5 movie couples whose on-screen sparks masked off-screen contempt from Pierce Brosnan, fuming over a pregnant Terry Hatcher's late call times, to Harrison Ford and Sean Young, turning a dystopian bedroom scene into a battleground of egos. We've pieced together never before, linked timelines, dug into declassified production notes, and tracked down the quiet apologies that never made headlines. What do these clashes tell us about power imbalances, gender scripts, and the hidden cost of chemistry? Stay with us for the full breakdown because the real drama wasn't in the script. It was in the silence between takes. Let's begin with a secret agent who learned that even James Bond can't defuse every explosion. Top 5 Pierce Brosnan and Terry Hatcher Tomorrow Never Dies. 1997. November. 1996. Pinewood Studios, outside London. The set of Time's Tomorrow Never Dies. Time's hums with the precision of a Swiss watch, except for one variable nobody saw coming. Pierce Brosnan, the 43, and riding the high of his debut as James Bond in Time's GoldenEye asterisk, straps into a harness for a midnight explosion sequence. Across the soundstage, Terry Hatcher, Sanchayi, is due on mark at 6 a.m. sharp. She rolls in at 7:30. Brosnan, already sweating under hot lights. It keeps his smile for the camera but lets the crew feel the chill. Within days, whispers ripple through the British tabloids. The American TV star is difficult, unprofessional, a liability on a $110 million machine. Brosnan himself is overheard telling a producer, "We're crafting a Bond legacy here, not a daytime drama." The quote lands in the Times Daily Mail, times before the week is out, and suddenly, Paris Carver Bond's jaded ex, now married to the villain, becomes the most scrutinized 5 minutes of screen time in the franchise. Fast forward to spring 1998. Asterisk. People Times magazine runs an exclusive sit-down with Hatcher. And the real story surfaces. She was 8 weeks pregnant during principal photography, battling nausea, so severe she could barely stand. She had kept the news quiet, terrified that MGM would recast the role to protect the schedule. "I was vomiting between takes," she recalls, praying no one would notice. Brosnan, reached by the same reporter, issues a rare public mea culpa. "I spoke out of turn. She was enduring something I couldn't imagine." The apology is gracious, but the damage is done. Paris Carver's arc is trimmed. Her death by scorpion venom now happens off-screen in a single, merciless cut. Hatcher's agent Fields calls for years afterward, asking if she's still difficult. She never auditions for another Bond film. Step back, and the pattern is unmistakable. This wasn't a clash of egos so much as a collision of eras. Brosnan, groomed in the old-school British system, prized punctuality as professionalism. Hatcher, a product of American network television, operated under a different code, protect the job at all costs, even if it means hiding a life-changing secret. Add the unspoken rule that pregnancy on a blockbuster set is still treated like a scheduling inconvenience, and the tension writes itself. Crew members later told Times Vanity Fair Times that Brosnan's frustration was less about the delay than the optics, how it looked to have the leading man cooling his heels while the supporting actress held up a global production. Yet, when Brosnan himself missed a day in 2002's Times, die another day Times for a minor dental procedure, the studio sent a private jet. The double standard wasn't subtle. It was structural. The fallout reshaped both careers in quiet ways. Hatcher pivoted to Times' Desperate Housewives asterisk, where her pregnancy became a plot point rather than a liability. Brosnan, ever the diplomat, began advocating for better communication on sets, though he'd wait until his 2006 Times GQ Times profile to name the incident directly. Paris Carver remains the shortest-lived Bond love interest in the modern era, her screen time clocking in at under 12 minutes. Fans still debate whether the brevity heightened the tragedy or simply reflected a rushed rewrite. What's undeniable is the lingering question if a single memo, Terry, is experiencing severe morning sickness. Please adjust. Call times had circulated. Could the character have survived the final cut? In today's Hollywood, where wellness coordinators and intimacy advisors are standard, the answer feels obvious. Back then, it was revolutionary. The deeper truth is that the Brosnan-Hatcher friction didn't undermine the film. In some ways, it sharpened it. Paris's haunted glances at Bond carry an extra layer of subtext when you know the actress was fighting her own private war. The pain wasn't manufactured, it was real. And it bled into every frame. Great on-screen chemistry. It turns out, doesn't always require harmony. Sometimes it just needs two people surviving the same storm, even if they're not on the same side of it. And if you think a delayed Bond girl was the height of set dysfunction, hold that thought, because our next story takes us to a rain-soaked Los Angeles soundstage, where a replicant and a Deckard turned a love scene into a Cold War that still echoes through sci-fi history. Top 4 Harrison Ford. Sean Young Blade Runner 1982, Los Angeles. Summer 1981. The Times Blade Runner time set at Warner Brothers is a pressure cooker of neon lights, artificial rain, and escalating costs already $10 million over budget before the first love scene. Harrison Ford. Saint-Tropez. Fresh from swinging across ravines, in Time's Raiders of the Lost Ark *, arrives as Rick Deckard, the burned-out detective hunting replicants. Sean Young, 22, and virtually unknown beyond a small role in Times. Stripes *, steps in as Rachel, the synthetic woman who believes she's real. Ridley Scott envisions a noir romance laced with existential dread. But by week 6, the only dread is between the leads. The pivotal bedroom interrogation where Deckard forces Rachel to confront her manufactured memories earns a grim nickname from the crew, the hate scene. Ford wants one take and done. Young pushes for emotional resets. Between setups, he retreats to his trailer with a script and a scowl. She paces the soundstage, demanding another run-through. A grip later recalls to Time's Vanity Fair times in 2017, Ford muttering under his breath, "This isn't acting, it's endurance training." The friction isn't random, it's rooted in mismatched worlds. Ford, a carpenter turned star, approaches roles with pragmatic efficiency. Get the shot. Move on. Young, trained in method intensity at the Lee Strasberg Institute, treats every line like a therapy session. Add the grueling schedule 87 nights of simulated downpour and tempers fray. Scott, desperate to salvage the timeline, sides with his leading man. Production notes, leaked years later, show daily call sheets adjusted to accommodate Ford's preferences. While Young's requests for additional rehearsals are marked optional, in a 2023 interview with FandomWire, Young goes further, alleging Scott rewrote Rachel's unscripted slap across Deckard's face as subtle retaliation after she rebuffed his offset dinner invitations. Scott has never directly addressed the claim, but crew veterans describe a director caught between protecting his $28 million investment and navigating unspoken set hierarchies. Zoom out, and 3 imbalances crystallize the conflict. First, the age and fame chasm. Ford is indie. Han Solo incarnate. Young is a rookie whose biggest credit is a comedy cameo. Second, directorial allegiance. Scott, under studio siege, prioritizes the star who can greenlight sequels. Third, the gendered lens through which behavior is judged. Ford's clipped responses read as stoic professionalism. Young's insistence on depth becomes demanding. The result, Rachel's vulnerability feels raw on screen. But the cost is off-screen isolation. Young finishes principal photography convinced she's been sidelined. Ford wraps relieved to escape the emotional quicksand. The repercussions ripple for decades. Young's next big break, Vicky Vale in Tim Burton's Times Batman Times, slips away after a horseback riding accident officially breaks her arm. Insiders. speaking anonymously to Times Entertainment Weekly, Times in 1988. Hint at studio hesitance over her Times, Blade Runner Times reputation. She pivots to indie films and cult favorites like Times Ace Ventura *. But the difficult tag lingers. Ford, meanwhile, cements his mythic reserve. Directors praise his one-take wonders. The film itself bombs initially, $33 million against expectations, but cult status elevates Deckard's brooding to iconography. Fast forward to 2017's Times Blade Runner. 2049 times Rachel appears in a 30-second hologram, recreated with a body double, and Young's archived likeness. She receives no payment. No consultation. In a Times Daily Beast Times piece that year, she calls it the final erasure. Ford, reprising Deckard, tells reporters the past is best left in the rain. Today, as AI likeness laws gain traction in California, bolstered by SAG-AFTRA's 2023 strike wins, Young's case could set precedent. A 2025 bill proposal would mandate compensation for digital recreations of performers' faces, potentially retroactive. Ford, now 82, and selective with roles, has stayed silent on the sequel's ethics, focusing instead on Times Indiana Jones, Times Farewells. Yet the original feud underscores a timeless Hollywood truth. Some tensions aren't interpersonal, they're baked into the system. The hate scene delivered electric unease because it wasn't entirely acted, and if you thought a replicant's identity crisis was intense, wait until we head to a Navy boot camp, where one actress's nickname for her co-star became the insult that outlasted the uniforms. Top 3, Richard Gere and Deborah Winger. An Officer and a Gentleman, 1982. Port Townsend, Washington, Fall 1981. The sleepy mill town transforms into the gritty backdrop for Times. An Officer and a Gentleman *, a story of redemption wrapped in navy whites and working-class heartbreak. Richard Gere, 31 and already a brooding heartthrob, from Times American Gigolo *, embodies Zach Mayo, a directionless drifter chasing officer candidacy to escape his past. Deeper Winger, Arshaloke, channels raw vulnerability as Paula Pokrivki, the factory girl who sees through his defenses. Director Taylor Hackford pushes for authenticity, real rain, real drills, real emotion. But from the first rehearsal, the leads operate on parallel tracks that never intersect. Winger, known for her electric improv in Times, Urban Cowboy *, bounces lines off Gere like a sparring partner. He responds with silence, eyes fixed on an internal horizon. Frustrated after a stalled read-through, she leans to co-star Louis Gossett Jr. and whispers the phrase that sticks brick wall. It's not just a quip, it becomes the unspoken rule of the set. The divide deepens with each passing week. Gere, influenced by Buddhist principles, treats acting as a meditative subtraction. Strip away the noise, reveal the essence. Winger thrives on addition ad-libs, physical cues, the back and forth that makes scenes breathe. Gossett Jr., in his 2010 memoir Times, An Actor and a Gentleman *, paints a vivid picture of the two stars orbiting at least 50 feet apart between takes, only converging when the camera demanded it. Then comes the curveball, a nude love scene added late in prep, without prior discussion in Winger's contract. She pushes back through her agent, but the schedule is locked. Trust erodes further. Gere, focused on the character's isolation, offers no bridge. Hackford, juggling Paramount's deadlines, lets the tension simmer, believing it fuels the film's blue-collar edge. Look closer, and the clash reveals clashing philosophies amplified by circumstance. Gere's minimalism isn't arrogance. It's discipline honed from years of rejection before stardom. Winger's fire isn't chaos. It's the hunger of a Texan outsider proving her grit. The nude scene controversy highlights a broader issue. Consent protocols were casual at best, and Winger's objections valid concerns about exposure get reframed as high maintenance. Gossett Jr., steps in as mediator during drill sequences. But even he admits, the lead's dynamic is oil and water. The warehouse lift, the film's emotional pinnacle, captures it all in one unbroken take. Gere hoists Winger, not out of rehearsal harmony, but because neither wants the intimacy prolonged. The crew erupts in applause. Off camera, the silence returns. The aftermath carves different paths. The movie storms to $130 million domestically, turning the uniform into a cultural symbol and launching 1,000 proposals. Gere's enigmatic reserve catapults him to Time's Pretty Woman Times, leading man status. Winger earns an Oscar nomination for Best Actress. But the difficult whisper follows her echoed in later projects like Time's Terms of Endearment, Asterisk, where similar intensity is praised under Shirley MacLaine's wing. She steps away from Hollywood in the mid-90 seconds, citing burnout and unequal scrutiny. Gere, reflective in a 2002 Times Guardian Times profile, downplays the drama as feather-ruffling, but Winger, at a 2022 Yahoo virtual panel for the 40th anniversary, owns her part with a laugh. I was insecure and lashing out. He was just present. The moment humanizes both, shifting the narrative from feud to growth. In retrospect, the friction didn't dilute the romance, it distilled it. Paula's longing gazes carry the weight of unbridgeable gaps, mirroring real life. The film's success proves creative discord can yield gold. Yet the toll falls unevenly. Winger's boldness branded her, while Gere's quietude elevated him. With her 2025 memoir on the horizon, expect a fuller reckoning, not blame, but context on how women's voices were often the casualty in pursuit of grit. The story endures as a reminder that some of cinema's most uplifting moments are born from unresolved strain, and if boot camp barriers built an icon, imagine what happens when newsroom rivals collide. Our next chapter takes us to a rom-com, where the title became Prophecy, and the only thing investigated was each other's patience. T.O.P. 2. Julia Roberts and Nick Nolte, I Love Trouble 1994. Chicago. Summer 1993. The Windy City doubles as the battleground for Time's I Love Trouble asterisk. A screwball romp about rival newspaper columnists who stumble into a corporate conspiracy involving contaminated milk. Julia Roberts, 25, and crowned America's sweetheart after Time's Pretty Woman Times shattered box office records. Plays Sabrina Peterson, a sharp, ambitious rookie with a smile that sells tickets. Nick Nolte, Whooshar, the gravel voice survivor of Times, the Prince of Tides, Times and Times 48 Robbers, steps in as Peter Brackett, the cynical veteran coasting on past glory. Disney pours $45 million into the project, banking on their banter to recapture old Hollywood charm. From day one on location, though, the only thing crackling is tension. Roberts, meticulous and script-bound, arrives with pages highlighted in 3 colors. Nolte, a jazzriff improviser, toast lines like confetti. A simple exchange about a train derailment spirals into 20 takes, what the Levin to the Prylyovson days, with Roberts insisting on fidelity and Nolte ad-libbing until the crew clocks overtime. The breaking point comes early and publicly. In a December 1993 Times New York Times profile promoting Times, the Pelican Brief asterisk, Roberts doesn't mince words. Nolte goes out of his way to repel people, calling him completely disgusting, in a tone that's half exasperation, half warning. The quote detonates across tabloid. Nolte, reached on set by a Times Los Angeles Times stringer, fires back to anyone listening. She's not a nice person, everybody knows that. Production memos, leaked months later, reveal a pragmatic fix intimacy. Scenes are split, with stand-ins handling close-ups for efficiency and actor comfort. The final kiss, a green screen composite stitched in post-production. Disney executives breathe relief when dailies show sparks anyway. But the damage is irreversible. Roberts, newly married to Lyle Lovett, In a whirlwind June ceremony, shields her private life fiercely. Nolte's offhand ribbing about the timing lands like salt in a wound. He later admits in a 2022 Times Business Insider Times reflection that he mishandled the personal milestone, chalking it up to his own gruff style, clashing with her guarded rise. Peel back the layers. And the storm brews from converging forces. A 27-year generation gap sets the stage. Roberts, shaped by studio grooming and precision, views deviation as risk. Nolte, a 1,970 seconds maverick, sees the script as a starting point. Power dynamics tilt decisively. Roberts is the film's insurance policy. Her $7 million salary dwarfing Nolte's, making him the expendable half in executives' eyes. Press amplification turns private gripes public spectacle, framing Roberts' assertiveness as sweetheart soured while Nolte's barbs read as authentic grit. The stand-in solution, pragmatic on paper, underscores eroded trust. No shared frame for the lover's climax. Yet the film limps to $31 million domestic, buoyed by Roberts' draw, but bruised by reviews, calling the chemistry forced. She emerges with reinforced boundaries, slipping no-kiss stipulations into future deals, a quiet revolution in writer language. Nolte, philosophical in hindsight, pivots to character roles. His reputation for unpredictability intact. The legacy unfolds in subtle shifts. Roberts' experience informs her selective rom-com era, think Times My Best Friend's Wedding *, where George Clooney's easy rapport replaces friction. Nolte's 2022 candor humanizes the veteran, admitting fault without erasing the mismatch. In a post, * quiet on-set Times landscape, where documentaries expose toxic norms, Roberts' pushback reads less like diva demands, and more like early advocacy for consent and collaboration. The movie survives as a time capsule of 1,990 seconds excess. Its poisoned milk plot, a metaphor for what curdled behind the scenes. Star power and stubbornness can coexist on screen, but off it, they fracture bonds that never mend. The real trouble wasn't the conspiracy, it was the collision of eras, egos, and expectations that no rewrite could fix. And if newsroom rivals couldn't share a frame, our final story plunges into Verona Beach, where a teenage tragedy played out amid pranks, crushes, and the awkward dawn of superstardom. Top 1. Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes. Rome Juliet 1996. Mexico City. Spring 1995. The sprawling Churubusco studios pulse with the chaotic energy of Baz Luhrmann's vision, Shakespeare reimagined as a feverish MTV fever dream. Complete with Hawaiian shirts, neon crucifixes, and a soundtrack that screams 90 seconds angst. Leonardo DiCaprio. 21 and buzzing from Times, The Basketball Diaries * embodies Romeo Montague, a restless heir in a world of gang warfare and forbidden love. Claire Danes. 16, and still wearing the emotional residue of Times, My So-Called Life *, Angela Chase. Steps into Juliet Capulet. The sheltered daughter navigating awakening desire. Luhrmann. Fresh off Times. Strictly, ballroom *. Casts for raw youth. But the audition room already hints at turbulence. Natalie Portman. Initially tapped for Juliet, bows out after test scenes with DiCaprio feel too charged, her youth making the romance read uncomfortably. DiCaprio, reviewing the footage, pushes hard for Danes. She looks me in the eye, he tells producers, sealing her role. The chemistry ignites on paper, but on the ground, it sputters into something far more complicated. By week 4 of the grueling shoot, 14-hour days under blistering lights and artificial storms, the set becomes a playground divided. DiCaprio, channeling the class clown energy that masked his own ascent from child actor to heartthrob, unleashes pranks, water guns mid-scene, fake spiders and makeup chairs, improvised outbursts, that derail takes Danes, an old soul-honing method precision at the Professional Performing Arts School, craves focus and quiet preparation. She views the antics not as fun, but as disruption. Telling a production assistant, they make her lose the thread. Off camera, conversation is minimal. Danes retreats to her script, DiCaprio to his entourage. Luhrmann, sensing the undercurrent, leans in. The tension is the text. He confides to a cinematographer, allowing the unease to seep into the fish tank gaze and balcony whispers. In a 2024 Times W Magazine Times retrospective, Danes reflects with maturity the pranks grated, but beneath it simmered a problematic crush. She consciously shut down to preserve professionalism. At 16, navigating fame's glare, vulnerability felt like liability. The mismatch stems from archetypal teen wiring, amplified by stardom's pressures. DiCaprio's humor is a shield, deflecting the weight of sudden A-list scrutiny post. Asterisk, what's eating Gilbert Grape? Asterisk. Danes' seriousness is armor protecting a boundary in an industry that often blurs lines for young women. The age gap, 5 years, but worlds apart in experience, adds unspoken layers. DiCaprio parties with the crew. Danes, under parental supervision, clocks, curfews. Luhrmann mediates with group dinners. But the divide holds. The elevator love scene, meant to sizzle, requires multiple resets, not for passion, but to align their rhythms. Yet the final cut pulses with authenticity. Juliet's wide-eyed wonder clashes with Romeo's reckless grin, mirroring the off-screen push-pull. Consequences unfold in career pivots and cultural echoes. Danes, exhausted by the intensity, turns down Rose in Time's Titanic, Time citing romantic epic fatigue in a 2020 Times L Times interview, though whispers tie it to avoiding another DiCaprio whirlwind. His pranks find a warmer home with Kate Winslet, birthing Time's Titanic asterisks, enduring bromance lore. Danes channels the experience into Time's Homeland asterisks depth, earning Emmys for layered vulnerability. DiCaprio ascends to blockbuster king, his boyish charm evolving into environmental advocacy. The film grosses $147 million. Its aesthetic angel wings, gun-toting choir boys, seeping into Gen Z TikTok trends 28 years later, with the fish tank clip amassing millions of duets. As Luhrmann's style inspires reboots, a 2031 35th anniversary joint interview feels inevitable, two veterans reflecting on awkward origins. Ultimately, the DiCaprio-Danes dynamic proves that unrequited on-set tension can forge eternal screen magic, their awkward adolescence pranks unmet. Crushes, unspoken, infuses the tragedy with palpable ache. Shakespeare's star-crossed lovers endure, not despite the friction, but because of it, two teens fumbling toward immortality amid real-world growing pains. The feud, if it can be called that, resolves in hindsight as a rite of passage raw, unresolved, and profoundly human.